Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's great greetings from Beijing. I hope everyone was, keep on looking for ICANX talks. This wonderful talks since April 17th, already till the 18 weeks. So this was 18 weeks of ICANX talks. We get the latest result from the top scientists worldwide. We connect the world and the universe. So this was weekly, program, and it's getting more and more popular in the whole world. And we are so proud of speakers. We are so proud of our program. So today we continue this wonderful talks. Yeah, before we go to the talks directly, I want to introduce some new things. Yeah, since last week we have an event for the graduate school students. This named the Academy League, like the Super League in the Europe, like the football. Yeah, but it's not played like the football. We choose 10 regions. Each region have 3 supervisors, 6 students, and to get on the stage give the lectures. Yeah, each lectures will counting into the points. And since the last 2 weeks, we have 4, games was played on the stage. So the students already done wonderful job in these 4, PK. So one of them take very good results. So here is a list of the last 2 weeks, our results for the student. I'm sorry for the international, attendees. This was in Chinese because the academic league now is in Chinese. Later we'll move to the national part. I think we can get many countries graduate school students join us. This was for the supervisors list, and this was for the regions list. So all the students love this game. All the supervisors love this game too. So they think this will be a good platform for the graduate students who can, get more and more practice, and show time on the stage. And this was a new event. Another new event will come out is like our Rising Star for ACS Nano and for, micro and nano engineering. So this we will working together with top journal in photonics is light. So this will be a rising star of light. So the topic will focus on the optical related fields. So we have the chair and the co-chairs from all over the world. We have several, hosters to, be host all this wonderful event. Now it's calling for the candidates. The people who is born after, 1980 and is getting the PhD in 7 years. So will be qualified to join this competition, to join this Rising Star program. And please provide 3, documents, 4 documents. And you can see more details on the website. And the selection process will be, from the candidates to choose, select for 10 finalists. And the 10 finalists will give lectures on ICANX in the last 2 weeks of October. And then we select the winners. The winners will win the prize and also some benefits, very good benefits. The first prize will give 1 person, it has $3,000. And the second prize will goes to 2 persons. I have $1,500 to each. And the third prize is 3 persons, each have $1,000. The big benefit is the light publication will give them free coupons for all these finalists. So yeah, be sure to join us, and if you're working in the optical related, field, to submit your applications and to get nominations. And this is welcome the young scientists from the worldwide to join this wonderful program. And we want to give more, time and more show to all these young scientists. this was the ongoing event. Yeah, please do submit your application, your materials to the Light journals. This is the best chance for you to win the title, the world's prize, and also you win the attention to the whole world. And today we are going to have the lectures because I just announced that we have rising stars. Yeah, for the light optical related work. So you see that today we have two rising stars here. Yeah, Robert was rising stars from Cornell, and Miso was already shown on ICAX is for rising stars of ACS Nano. Yeah, she is doing great job, and she's going to be the guest host of this session. And Robert from Cornell University, he is one of the top young scientists in the whole world, has working a lot for the this deformation and continuously structures. In one word, is a soft robots. So he did a lot of nice and famous, the soft robots. You may saw on the journal, on the news. Yeah, you need know that you must know their structures. Now you mean their designers. So Robert was from Cornell, and he's going to talk about his story about optoelectrical sensing of the deformation and the continuous structures. So Robert, the stage is yours. The word is yours, please. Hi. Okay. How about words? Hi, Robert. I couldn't hear your voice. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can.
Okay. Now comes. Yeah, please.
Wonderful. Well, what an honor to be here. And those are some great words from you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to share the work myself and my colleagues have done over about the last decade. I'm going to structure the presentation more as a survey, a high-level presentation, and I encourage you to read the papers I talk about, and particularly the supplemental information, because a lot of details are buried in there. So first, I'm going to talk about why soft materials are important for improving the endurance and adaptability of robots generally. We'll talk about soft artificial muscles specifically and their application right now. Then how we can use these soft artificial muscles in combination with electrohydraulics to improve the operational lifetime of robots. Then how we can add sensing, touch sensing to these musculoskeletal architectures. And all this is really complicated. So if we have to manufacture these and it's too hard, it's not worthwhile. But luckily additive manufacturing allows us to do these things. And so I'll talk a little bit about printing soft composite architectures. And then I'll end, if there's time, with stretchable electroluminescent displays. So there's a fundamental contradiction that we need to solve, or a basic contradiction we need to solve in robotics, and that's that we can have enduring robots right now today, or we can have agile robots right now today, but we don't have both. An example of an enduring robot is that of an autonomous vehicle, and they can already drive for, at least in the electrical versions, more than 300 miles on a single charge, go faster than 200 miles per hour, and accelerate from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. But at least in the US, the reason this works is because we have flat roads, and that costs us hundreds of billions of dollars, to probably around $1 trillion today, to create that. Legged robots wouldn't need roads, but they're very agile. You've all seen examples of robots doing backflips and running and all these things, but they can't do it for very long. It's not compared to wheeled vehicles and not compared to their animal models they're based off of. At this point, I'll also say there's a lot of prior work that I would like to cite and talk about, but there's not that much time. And also I didn't know about taking pictures off of their papers and putting it on here and the copyright consequences. So I won't be talking specifically about that, but please, I'll let you know along the way as I'm reminded of other people's work. So an example of how legged vehicles helped us in the past, this is a Pony Express rider. In early America, the mail was delivered on horseback. And these horses would do they were tremendous. They would run for 15 miles at 10 miles per hour. And then we would switch horses to keep on going. And that worked really well without roads. And one of the reasons these animals were so efficient and effective at what they were doing is that their musculoskeletal structure, ligaments, and both soft and hard composite architecture of these animals are very energy efficient, even though they're working with not the most efficient actuators. Muscle is around 35% efficient. A DC microgear motor or a DC motor is something like 85% efficient. So the animal world doesn't have the most efficient systems, but they deal in the real environment in a very efficient way. So to boil it all down, the reason animals and humans are so effective over, let's say, anthropomorphic robots are that we have hundreds of skeletal muscles, depending on how you want to think about it. Could be thousands or tens of thousands. Robots have tens of actuators. We have vasculature that delivers energy-dense power to our motors, our muscle. Robots have a centralized power system that delivers energy over wiring to remote locations. This power source is a single function. All it does is deliver power. It doesn't do anything else. Our vasculature handles thermal loads, removes waste, performs a lot of other functions. We have a nervous system that connects millions of mechanoreceptors to our brain. A robot has a centralized controller that does sensor fusion for just a few types of sensors: vision, sometimes tactile sensor, optical encoders, stuff like that, but many orders of magnitude less information than we use. And humans and other animals were grown from the bottom up, and that allows us to be complicated, where robots are assembled from the top down and fundamentally limits the complexity that robots can have. Even plants in nature do a better job of managing the engineering contradiction of adaptability versus endurance. This is a palm tree in a rainstorm. And what a leaf wants to do, what a tree wants to do, is have very thin, wide leaves that absorb sunlight to provide power so it can convert soil into structure. But if a leaf is very thin and big in the wind, and it's stiff in the wind, it'll blow off. So what nature has done is engineered leaves so that when the wind blows, the leaf folds and bends away with the wind so it doesn't break. And even if it does break or the branch breaks, it can regrow itself. I find it interesting to point out that the very first use of the word robot was in Rossum's Universal Robots, published in 1921, and it was a play. And in this play, robots were grown or synthesized from a green sludge, and it was organic matter. But in the plays that came after it, when they were demonstrated, the robots were represented as metal, rigid structures. And I think maybe if we had embraced chemistry or soft materials from the onset, we'd be farther along than we are now in this space. And I think we're getting there now. So nature designs with toughness in mind, not really strength. One of the reasons is that high temperatures aren't really available in nature, and you need high temperatures for processing ceramics and metals. But rubber and polymers and other composites like that don't need to be processed at high temperatures, and that's why you see soft materials so prevalent in nature. It doesn't mean it's the best choice all the time, but it's a generally good choice, and that's why we see it everywhere. And you can see that in the integral, the stress strain curves of ceramics, metals, and rubbers. Now, these aren't to scale, or they are to scale, but they're not they're disproportioned. But still, rubbers absorb huge amounts of energy, megajoules per cubic meter of energy. And to set a scale, if you're familiar with bowling or a bowling ball going down an alley to knock pins over is around 10 joules. So that is so much energy that these rubbers that we produce are capable of absorbing. And rubber and polymers are just a completely different type of material than a ceramic or a metal is. So if you just look at a very simple model for rubber deformation, um, it's entropy dominated. And what that means is polymers want to be a random and coiled network of polymers. That gives them the most configurational entropy. But when you stretch them, you're aligning those polymers, and that's entropically unfavorable. Well, it reduces the entropy, which is energetically unfavorable. And since this is a conserved volume, when you stretch it, you shrink in the other directions. And so then you can relate these principal strains to each other. And if you take the derivative of that free energy, let's say you're stretching in one direction with length, then you can get the force required to stretch in that direction. And then that gives you and then by the area, gives you the stress. And that stress is proportional to the number density, N over V, of polymer chains and the temperature. And this quantity here is the modulus of the material, how hard it is to stretch. And here you can see that if you increase the temperature, you increase the modulus, you make it harder to pull. And this is very different from a metal. Whereas in a metal, as you heat it up, it becomes softer. So this is sort of like an alien material. Intrinsically, and I think I might not be being displayed anymore, but that's okay. So as you increase the temperature, you make it harder to pull. So that's, again, a very different material than a metal or a ceramic, which becomes easier to pull when you heat it up and it eventually melts. Another benefit you get from using polymers in your engineering, in your robots, is that when you stretch it, and as long as you haven't plastically deformed it, which is hard to do in rubbers, then when you relieve that stress, you return to the original shape with little energy lost using today's synthetic rubbers. And that means you get ligaments for free in your musculoskeletal architecture. So this is an early example of a soft gripper that we made. I made this when I was a postdoc in George Whiteside's group. And what it shows is as you're inflating these fingers, they're wrapping around this fennel and then finding the best way, probably a very good way, to distribute the force across the surface of that fennel to pick it up. And the reason I like showing this is it's doing this as a material computation. There's no computer in the loop here in the traditional sense. The material or the fingers are applying a force, getting a force feedback from the fennel, and that stress strain response causes the reconfiguration of those fingers. That is a material computation that we do all the time. In the animal kingdom, we post-process and filter information mechanically before it gets to our brain at all, and that allows us to handle the environment much better. Excuse me. Just making sure I'm keeping on time. Okay, so what I showed you is a balloon. And balloons are actually quite difficult to shape. And that's because when you inflate them, you're getting a radial strain and a circumferential strain. And in order to tune how our actuators inflate, we pattern strain limiting layers on them. We can have them stretch in some directions and not stretch in other directions. And by removing the circumferential strain from the modeling or the predictive analysis, it becomes easier to tell how our actuators are going to respond. And so so James Peekle, who's now a professor at UPenn, did this work in my group where he laser cut circles or rings of fabric and pattern them onto rubber so that when you inflate the rubber, it'll radially project where there is no strain limiting layer. And as an example of the power of this simple approach, he patterned a aloe plant shape so that when he inflates it, you can project these little projections. And based on the model he developed, we can program in -0 and positive Gaussian curvatures, which in theory is all you need to replicate any shape. So I think fluidic actuators or these types of balloons are a very powerful approach for making soft robots. They're high force density, they're simple to make, and here's some examples of where we've applied them. This is a haptic interface for a HTC Vive virtual reality controller. We did this work with NVIDIA Research a few years ago. But these are pockets that are wrapped around a handle of a VR controller. And when they inflate, you actually feel it on your hand. Now, what you'll see here is a tether coming off because we need to deliver air or fluid. And so these are tethered, and that is a disadvantage. But in a few minutes, I'll show you one way we're working on getting rid of that tether. But in this case, what you're seeing is when Brian Peel, who now works at NVIDIA, was squeezing that trigger, he made it so it felt like liquid was going through his hand. And that of course isn't what really happens when you would squirt a gun, but it's an abstract representation of touch. And when people used this device, and because it's robust manufacturing that we can do because these fluidic actuators are quite easy to make, he and Ben McMurray is now at 3M, he was able to demonstrate this for thousands of interactions, and people really liked the tethered controller or the haptic controller versus the other one. This is another example of a haptic interface in virtual reality, where Omer Shapira at NVIDIA made this game, which had balloons and a steel sword, so you could pop the balloons when you hit it. But Ben, who's controlling it, can squeeze on that handle, send a barometric control to the computer, deflate the handle, and turn it into a spongy sword. This spongy sword, of course, can't pop balloons, and you can see that in the game, but Ben also feels like he's holding a spongy sword because he has deflated that controller. And this isn't an abstract representation of touch, this is a direct representation of touch. We've also applied this to assisting with cardiovascular problems and helping a heart pump. Working with Weill Cornell Medicine, received a CAD model of a heart, and then Ben molded a sleeve that would wrap around the heart and when inflated, help it pump. We used an EKG to sense a heart rhythm, and then at the appropriate time, inflate the actuators. We were able to do this in time. So this is in rhythm with a heartbeat. And this is that sleeve helping this heart pump. And we were able to apply physiologically relevant, not quite high enough yet, flow rates and high enough pressures. And you can see that this sleeve that we made is thicker than it should be, but there's a lot of promise here to make a thin sleeve that can help the heart pump. An advantage here is that you don't put holes in the heart, which is how it's currently done, and could even potentially be used for pediatric heart assist devices. So that was all applications in the non-mobile space. Also, when I was in George Whiteside's group at Harvard, we made this multi-gate soft machine that could walk towards this obstacle. And I'm controlling it at the other side. A much younger version of me was controlling the other side. And when it hit that gap, I changed my control of it to cause it to undulate to the other side, still pulling along that tether. And I'll talk about removing that tether later. And when we get to the other side, I inflate the spine, and then it stands up and it will walk away, I promise you. And we can call this a machine, we can call this a robot in the materials community, because there is the potential for a stress strain response, again, via that material computation. But we have, we can also make it a real robot in the traditional sense by making it larger and putting the onboard electronics and sensing and actuation. But there's a problem with scaling up these soft robots. Here's that one I just showed you, operating at, I think, a delta P of 7 psi. And then this is a smaller one operating at the same pressure and flow rates and just running along. And then this is a larger one, almost a meter long, at that same pressure and flow rate. And it's moving much slower. Of course it would, because this is a mass transport problem. And so this robot this machine is slowly lumbering along. Also, when we increase the size of it, the weight goes up with the cube of the length, but the area only goes up with the square. And since we are causing force with pressure transduced over that area, eventually we lose and we can't lift this robot up with these same pressures. So we have to increase the pressure. And the reason this robot is colored differently is because we're using a higher elastic modulus silicone so that I can eventually use higher pressures to cause it to go faster. But that box, that relief pattern in the middle, holds the electronics and air compressors and things like that. But I think huge soft robots on land aren't the right answer. This is with all the electronics and microcontrollers and valving on board. This is done with Mike Tolley and I while we were both still at Harvard. And then, we're just exposing it to different sort of brutal torture to sort of show that soft robots aren't fragile. You can do a lot of things to them. You can burn them, put them in acid, run over them. And as long as you protect the electronics, it's probably better than metal systems. So my first student was Huichen Zhao, who's now an assistant professor in mechanical engineering at Tsinghua and doing really good there. She helped solve a problem. If you look in this section of this robot, you can see this sort of bandage. And that's because over time, you start to peel apart the layers of this machine at high pressures because we're bonding one piece to another piece, and that creates a very weak interface. So what she did is create a rotational casting method, which makes the whole system monolithic. So there is no bonding of anything. And so she made a little hollow sphere and inflated it just to show this principle, making actuators that could hold 10 times, apply 10 times the force as other actuators of similar actuators because she can apply higher pressures. So that is one approach to having larger robots using higher pressures. But I think we can see that totally soft isn't always a good thing. So this is an octopus that is very impressive underwater, but when it's on land, it has a hard time. And that's because it has no skeleton. And all animals, most animals that walk planet Earth or above ground on planet Earth have a skeletal structure to handle gravity if they're large. And this octopus doesn't. So it has to keep burning energy to keep its muscles stiff to try and move along land. But if we have a skeleton, we reduce our ability to morph, which reduces our adaptability somewhat. So we came up with an approach to create a morphing, a reversible skeleton that allows us to keep the benefits of a morphing soft structure, but also bear load when the skeleton is on. We did that simply. This is Ilse van Meerbeek. The Ilse van Meerbeek's work, who's at Lawrence Livermore right now. And so she has a silicone foam that she imbibes with a liquid metal and then freezes that metal at a low temperature. This is Field's metal, and it melts at around 60 degrees Celsius. So at low temperatures, it can bear a lot of load, and at higher temperatures, it deforms. And that's the quite simple principle. It behaves a little bit like bone because if you stretch it in its molten state and freeze it, you increase the yield stress in the direction you're stretching it. And bone does the same thing. If you're applying load to your skeleton and you have more load on one side of your body than the other, your bones will get thicker in the side you're applying load on. And this is just kind of fun. You can program in strain. So if you have a cube and then you force it into a cylinder and then freeze it in that, because of the entropic elasticity of the rubbers we talked about before, you can get a single actuation event when you heat it up later. So these are ways we can have soft artificial muscles that also behave as the architecture for the robot and even have reversible skeletons. But you've seen tethers in all of these systems because we're delivering compressed air. There's an opportunity to use fluids or liquids that are energy dense, like our own blood, in these fluidic actuators. So this is why would we do that? Because that same octopus on land, underwater, has tremendous attributes. And so what we want to do is make robots for used underwater so that we can have an additional benefit of using hydraulics Because if we have this hydraulic robot on land, it's not buoyantly matched, or it's not buoyantly supported, so it would be very heavy on land and have the same problems as that octopus we saw earlier. So it does appear that marine environments are a very good place to experiment and explore with soft robots, or very soft fluidic robots. So this is our first attempt. You can see James Peakle. I talked about him before, his reflection there, and then this is swimming under in a fish tank. But we're not the first people to make underwater soft robots. Daniela Russo's group at MIT has done a great job of that. Cecilia Lossky's group at IIT, same thing. This is a little different. If you open it up, we have pumps. We have two pumps: a pectoral fin pump and a tail fin pump. And the tail fin causes the tail fin to move back and forth and propel the robot. This pectoral fin pump just causes this pectoral fin to open and close as a biomimicking thing. It doesn't really help its propulsion, but this is exploratory, and so we wanted to try something else. And it has two circulatory systems in it. This pump moves liquid in these pectoral fins and into and out of these pectoral fins, into this reservoir and back to the pectoral fins. And the tail fin is moved by moving fluid into and out of it to cause it to swim. You can see this red part here, and that's a catholite. And that's the biggest difference between our underwater robot and other ones, is that this catholite is part of a half-cell redox flow battery. And here's an example of the pelvic fin battery, which goes here, which has a flexible zinc anode and the red catholite. And so that allows the half of this to be a liquid battery that can then be used to pressurize these actuators and cause the fins to move. And you can see this liquid being pumped through this pump here. And the reason for doing this, the overall reason, is that if you replace the inert hydraulic liquids used in these fluidic actuators with a redox flow battery chemistry or other energy dense fluid to power electronics, you can power these pumps with the same fluid that is being used for actuation, which increases the overall energy density of the system. So if you look at this graph here, we were able to increase, by using 125 watt hour per liter zinc iodide half cell battery, we were able to increase the operational lifetime by about 3 to 4 times. So increasing the overall energy density of this fish. So we can see it again with that new knowledge. It's not moving that fast. This is 2x speed, because what we've increased is the energy density. We didn't really affect the power density. To make this swim faster, we would need to increase the surface area of the electrodes. But of course, that brings complexity in manufacturing. This wasn't 3D printed, but with 3D printing and that idea in mind, it would be very possible to increase the power density of this underwater robot. But so far, none of the actuators or machines I've showed you have been true robots in the sense of that a traditional roboticist would think. There's no sensory feedback, computation, and then response to the environment automatically. To do that, we've decided to take a cue again from nature and add touch sensors throughout our robots. And I'll show you 2 ways we do that. This is work. This is an image from Patricia Hsu, who has made stretchable light guides that are confluent throughout 3D soft structures. And each one of these light guides is actually a touch sensor. Other people that have worked on this, Yonglei Park and Matthias Kohl at MIT are, I think, the people we come across in this field mostly. But Huichen Zhao, again, remember, she also did the rotational casting work, developed a stretchable light guide with a core and cladding that we then applied to these robots. And so as she stretches them, the power output is decreasing because of simply Beer's law. And it's a log linear response. So it's decibels in the y-axis, but it's repeatable. So she can do this thousands of times with the same response. And then there's no electronics in the actual part that stretches. So you can decouple the electronics from the stretchable sensing using photonic sensors. So these are fiber optic devices. They're not as good as glass ones, and that's mostly because the numerical aperture is smaller. The index of refraction difference between the silicone, in this case, and polyurethane is a relatively low numerical aperture, but we still get plus or minus 30-degree acceptance rate of rays into our light guide. And as long as these rays stay below a critical angle of 70 degrees, which they should based on the numerical aperture, then they're trapped in this light guide. And so that means light can escape from this in two ways. If you bend it, you can exceed that critical angle. If you press on it, you can create local curvature that allows it to exceed that critical angle. So light can leave from those two ways. But also, if you stretch it, you're increasing the path length that light has to propagate through. And it's not intuitive, or well, it is intuitive, but it's not something normal people in fiber optics think about, because they're used to inextensible light guides. But it's the same thing as if you take two pieces of glass and put them together, you get a decrease in power output due to impurities and other absorbing species in the glass. We have that in the light guides, and we actually are quite a lot more absorbing than a glass fiber optic. So we can't transmit for kilometers. We can transmit for meters, and that's okay because the scales we're working at are robot size scales. So Hui Chen put 3 of these stretchable light guides in each finger of this fluidically actuated hand. As she's pressing on it, you can see the response to the fingertip. And then she'll actuate a finger, and you'll see 2 different power output losses from bending and stretching. And she uses one to determine the pressure of the actuator and the other to determine the curvature. And one application for this, we think, is in agriculture. So she's pressurizing these fingers and moving them across these tomatoes and topographically mapping where they are, then pressing on each one, and then measuring the force versus displacement response in the fingertip. It's very sensitive. And the one that displaces the most for the same pressure is the one that's the ripest. And so then she recognizes that the middle one is the ripest and then selects it. Another way we can use these light guides for sensing is to use 2 interacting light guides. If I stretch on one of those light guides, you can't tell if you're stretching in the middle or the end or the beginning. It's the same effect mostly. But if you have 2 light guides and press them into each other, then you can couple light from one into the other. And that's because through a process of frustrated internal reflection, because if these light guides have the same, if you don't put the cladding on them, then they have the two indices of refraction match, and then you don't have total internal reflection, and light goes from one into the other. So Patricia used this concept to determine the location of touch along a single powered light guide that are interacting with incident unpowered light guides. But she did it by printing matrices on a 3D printer with porous cladding channels. And then she would thread these stretchable light guides into those channels. And because of the porosity, when you press one into the other, they actually touch and will couple light. And because she's printing it, she can program the mechanical properties, some like a metamaterial of these structures, so that it can be soft for a little bit and then stiffer, and then, or stiff for a little bit, then softer, and then stiff again. And this is a microCT of these light guides. When they're touching, this is how they interact. This is the device she made with it. There's one powered light guide on the top and many unpowered light guides below. When she presses one into the other, the light couples. That's why we can see it. But the other end of the loop goes to the phototransistors on the other side, which she then uses to compute the location and pressure that is being applied. Because Patricia is very talented, she made a very complicated soft printed architecture with a helix in the middle, and that helix carries a powered light guide, and then she has many U-shaped unpowered light guides incident on this helix. And then she tuned the stiffness of this cylinder with another helix that is quite thick. And then she threaded her powered light guides and unpowered light guides into this cylinder, did some finite element analysis to predict the kinds of displacements she would get for a particular pressure. And then you can see what we expect here, that when the powered light guide touches one of these incident ones, light will couple and come out. And then she should be able to relate the simulation with the measured output. And you can see the raw data on the right side, and then the reconstructed figure here on the left side. And it is doing what it's supposed to, because she printed the middle to be softer than the outsides. And that's what we see here. This middle part is displacing much more than the tops or bottoms. And she calculated that these white dots are so she can use digital image correlation to determine what the actual displacements are, and compare it to the reconstructed motions. And for this quite tall cylinder, she's getting, I think, around 3 millimeter positional accuracy, which is I think even better than when you try to touch your own back and figure out where you're touching. So she used the model-based approach to interpolate those signals and figure out the shape of this object. If we have many more sensors, then a more appropriate way to train our robot or system to know its shape is probably through statistical learning techniques. Ilse van Meerbeek did this by putting light into a foam-based fluidic actuator that we made previously that works like this. And so she did that by taking 30 optical light guides and putting them into this soft block, illuminating the interior and measuring the reflected light back, and then sending the information from these 30 optical fibers into KNN statistical learning approach, and then trained it to be able to predict the bend and twist angles of this foam. And it was quite accurate to within the boundaries of the light guide. So if she bends it too much or twists it too much, you start seeing the error bounds go way up. And that, we believe, is because she actually used plastic optical fibers and not rubber ones. So we think the predicted twists and bends would be even better over a larger range if we use soft light guides instead. So I mentioned a few times that we're relying on making very complicated systems to make enduring and adaptive robots. That's what biology builds from the bottom up. Right now we build from the top down. And to do a lot of the things I'm talking about, which is electrohydraulic batteries, putting sensors everywhere, and having a lot of actuators everywhere, it would be too expensive to be practical to make these robots. But luckily for us, at the same time as soft robotics is growing, the field of additive manufacturing is maturing. So it's a tool that we can use to improve, to get complexity for free. This is a carbon M1 printer that a former student of mine, Kevin O'Brien, used to print a prosthetic hand, and a passive transmission system he used to allow his prosthetic hand to be both very quick at grasping and forceful at grasping. And these are the passive transmission systems that he put inside of this hand. So there's not enough time to go through the details of everything about this hand, but even though it's mounted on this robot arm, all the power, sensing, and control is in the palm of the hand. So this would be able to do the same thing if it was dismounted from this arm. And what we can see is this hand doing something that soft robots many times don't do, which is applying quite a bit of force to something, in this case to crush this can. It's also very fast, so it can catch this thing being thrown at it. And if you see these white pads, those white pads are time of flight sensors that see objects and then measure the time for the reflected laser. So that hand was actually automatically grasping when that ball was being thrown at it. It also has stretchable light guides inside of it for position control of the grasping. Because this is 3D printed, we have exquisite control over the architecture and can put these small DC microgear motors, one per finger and two per thumb, on the inside of the palm of this hand, along with these gradient stiffness structures that allow rotation of the thumb, the threading of tendons, which this isn't a fluidic actuator, this is a tendon-based actuator that allows pulling and then grasping with the hand. These are the passive transmission systems I mentioned, which allow variable gearing, effective variable gearing of this effective torque of this motor, so that we can have high torque when it's loaded and high speed when it's unloaded. And then they rely on these flexible hinges or living hinges here that allow it to bend. And all of this is because we're using soft materials and we're using a high resolution, high speed printer. But all the materials you want aren't available on these systems, although they are very good now. So to provide a platform for alternative chemistries for printing, TJ Wallen created a thiolene-based silicone system to use mercaptosiloxane here and divinyl siloxane here, vary the concentrations of or the degree of substitution of these mercapto groups and the molecular weight in between the vinyl groups to tune the elastic responses or the stress strain response of the printed structure. And this work here from Brian Peel and also TJ from a few years earlier was on using commercially available elastomer resin to print actuators, which wasn't very good. It was good to get complex architectures, but the parts would fail after only a few actuation cycles because they weren't resilient. But these thiolene-based silicones are, and this stress strain curve, we can tune it to be very high strain and low modulus, or very high modulus and low strain. But the biggest result is that we can get hundreds of actuation cycles or 100 actuation cycles with no change in mechanical properties. And I think that's the most important thing, that when you spend the time to print something, it doesn't break immediately. And we get very complicated architectures with these silicones. This is just showing something you definitely couldn't mold. And you could envision doing stuff like this for the tendon routing or the photonic sensing, or each one being a little fluidic actuator. But the point is, and you can tune the modulus so that it responds to loading in different ways depending on the application you're pursuing. So using this, we TJ printed Touchdown, which is Cornell's mascot, and then just a simple actuator. But the point is, this actuator can actuate for thousands of times without failing. And this is Brian Peel's previous actuator, which can print, which is quite complicated. There's 4 different actuators in here that are being controlled. But the strain it can go to is more limited than the silicone one, and it does fail after just tens of actuation cycles. Now that we have the ability to print our own chemistries, we worked with Emmanuel G. Nellis's group, also at Cornell, to work on an acrylamide-based hydrogel, but make it ionically conductive. So using acrylamide, an acrylated trimethylammonium bisacrylamide, and then these sulfonated silica particles, negatively charged, tethered to the surface, we can create this ionically bridged network. So negative silica, positively charged polymer matrix, and then the covalent matrix of the network too. So we have these 2 networks work together to improve the toughness of these hydrogels. You can see us making these soft but resilient structures down here with a stress strain curve shown here. It's about 50 kilojoules per meter cubed. So it's quite tough still, even though it's soft. And then this is again our mascot. And then we're pushing it around, but what TJ is going to do here is put an LED in it, and then run an AC field through this AC electric field to cause the LED to light up. And this is we saw talk by Jiang Shuo on ionotronics, and this is one example of it. It's just printing it. And the reason this is working is because the ionic material in the composite is oscillating back and forth and driving that current. But this is using just a few percentage of sulfonated silicon nanoparticles. It's not really affecting the mechanical properties. We would love to be able to put more nanoparticles in here, but there's an upper limit, because as you add nanoparticles to these matrices, you're increasing the viscosity and elasticity of the melt, of the suspension. And the printing process we're using doesn't like that. We rely on liquid to flow in while we're lifting up a build head. You can see that here. So as liquid, we fill a vat with this photopolymerizable resin, and this build head is in it. And when you lift it up, that liquid is supposed to fill in, and then you print the next layer and you move up and so on and so forth until you have your part. And traditional wisdom is that you want to use a very low viscosity system, like 5 Pascal seconds, you see a lot. But when you add these nanoparticles, which you would like to create tough or electrically conductive or maybe magnetically or optically, whatever, resin, you're increasing the viscosity of this suspension via Stokes-Einstein, and then later on, as you increase the concentration, other effects come into play. But we used to figure out the upper limit of viscoelasticity from these nanoparticle suspensions. We used a fumed silica, which is normally used to thicken material like paint and stuff like that. But we were using it as a way to artificially increase the viscoelasticity of our suspension using these nanoparticles. We use that same Mercapto vinyl thiolene system as matrix as before for the silicone. And as we increase the volume fraction of the silica up to 20%, we get orders of magnitude increase in the apparent viscosity. And you can see at 15 weight percent, I think it's actually weight percent, the silicone doesn't flow down at a reasonable time scale. So if that material isn't going to flow into this vat as you lift it up, traditional wisdom would be you can't print it, except that you can. So the yield stress here, as you increase the concentration, is still pretty low, about 10 pascals. So we expect that isn't the reason it's not print. It would be hard to print. It's just the time scales of the flow are so incredibly high with these high viscosities. But if you could print them, even in these fumed silica cases, you could expect an increase from around 17 kilojoules per meter cubed for the 0% nanoparticle filling to around 225 kilojoules per meter cubed toughness. That's a lot of bowling balls, if you remember my analogy earlier. So there's a large motivation to be able to increase nanoparticle additives for toughness, let alone electrical or optical properties. So we wanted to figure out what is the ultimate limit here. And it came down to just the stress relaxation time of nanoparticle suspensions in this tau p, and then the Peckley number, which is just this relaxation time scale by the rate at which you're applying shear. And in our build head motion, what is a convenient print speed, we have about 30 hertz for the shear rate that we're applying at, and that sets and based on at least for the nanoparticle suspension chemistry we're using, a tau p of around 0.02 seconds. So with that 30 hertz shear rate and the 0.02 second relaxation time, you get a Peckley number of about 0.7, and this is printable. Still some roughness, but if we go to a higher concentration silica of 20%, and that relaxation time goes to 0.05 seconds, with a resulting Peckley number of about 1.7, and that is unprintable. So we can't print that, and we get these voids left over when we try to print it. The two ways we've used to solve this problem, or at least improve it, is to print slower, so a lower shear rate, and then also heat this tray so we can reduce the viscosity as well, and the time scale. Actually, that's much more important. This relaxation time scale. So that sets the limit. Now, we could increase the concentration of nanoparticles without doing that, just by not using fumed silica, but stabilizing silica suspension so that the effect on the viscoelasticity per volume fraction is less. But the point of this exercise was to find out this relationship to printing and viscoelasticity. So I think I have about 6 minutes left. So I'll quickly run through some features of a stretchable electroluminescent display, which isn't really necessary for a enduring adaptive robot, but we believe is necessary for adoption of robots and making them accepted by humans. So this is an example of this is a flamboyant cuttlefish, which is one of the most impressive displays in nature. It's also extremely poisonous and is trying to let you know not to eat it. We saw that and we wanted to replicate something like that, a soft morphing structure that could change its coloration. And so to do that, we used a capacitor, a stretchable capacitor, with zinc sulfide doped with different species like cadmium, which will, under a field-driven, an AC field excitation, emit light of different wavelengths depending on the doping, in different intensities based on the shape of the wave you're applying. This is a highly extensible rubber here, and we get a linear dependence on the capacitance as we stretch it. And that allows us, as I'm sure you've seen in other talks, to self-sense the deformation while displaying this information. We applied these stretchable capacitors with different dopants to some of these fluidic actuators to create this this undulating caterpillar-like robot. And one of the cool things about it is you're getting, not only are we getting a capacitive feedback for control, we're also getting a visual feedback, because as these rubbers are field driven, you get an increase in brightness based on how thin that capacitor is. When you're inflating it, you're also decreasing that thickness of the walls. We turned this, and that was done by Chris Larson, Brian Peel, and Shuo Li, by the way. So this is an inflating rubber membrane, and this is based off of a game, at least in the US, called Simon, which is a memory game that has different color panels, and you press them based on your memory to try and see the longest sequence you can do. But we did it so it's sort of like a vanishing interface. It's not there, and all of a sudden it's there, and also it's a joy to interact with. So let me, yeah. So you can press it to high deformation, and because of the capacitance change, you can also use each one as a touch panel. Shuo Li, who just defended in my group and is now doing a postdoc with John Rogers, made this RGB display using transfer printing, but by hand. So there's a great opportunity to improve the resolution of this technique. And collaborators like Ben Chi is doing fantastic work with increasing the brightness and reducing the voltage requirements of these systems. But you can see some crosstalk and some flickering here. That's because of the high voltages we need to drive these things. It's low current, but so you can power these by battery, but still the high voltage is not great. I think there's not enough time, so I won't talk about this, but we've used these to control things like games. But my group is fantastic. I'm very lucky to work with these great students. I think I've mentioned everybody from this work along the way. Kai-Yang Wang did the 3D printing. Shuo Li worked on the stretchable displays. Kevin worked on the prosthetic hand. Pan also worked on the printing. Patricia worked on the light guides. I don't see Lilia here, but she's working on light guides too. Anyway, great group. Sorry if I missed anybody, but I love working with you all. And these are collaborators that have been represented in this paper: Emmanuel Jane Ellis, Meredith Silverstein, and Lyndon Archer from Cornell, Barbara Matsalai and Letizia Zullo from IIT, Yeet Menjuk and TJ Wallen from Facebook Reality Labs, Joseph Spute, David Lubke, and Omer Shapiro from NVIDIA. While Cornell Medicine, I work with Babak Mozadeh and Simon Dunham on the heart compression devices, and Roger Hanlon from the Marine Biological Laboratory for really understanding how octopuses work. I don't understand it, but I'm still learning, and how they're motivating our work. So thank you very much.
Okay, great talk. Yeah, really we see a lot of your papers, publications. Yeah, so this time I think a lot of questions was waiting for you. So Robert, we go to the question part. Okay, yeah, the first question is, Dear Professor Robert, amazing work. For the work pattern fiber on the balloon, could you tell more details like material deformation scale and how to control the 3D deformation? I think this was in the first part of the talk.
Yeah. Well, so we make, what we're really looking for is a very large difference in elastic modulus. So it can be a lot of material. I believe James Peakle used a nylon fabric that he laser cut and then just glued onto the rubber sheets. And those rubber sheets were silicone. Probably, I think they were EcoFlex 30 from Smooth On is where we get it from. And how we patterned it. Well, was that the other question? Did I answer the question? And how to control the 3D deformation. So yeah, we just, there's a paper from the 70s on mathematical modeling of these Gaussian curvatures we programmed. So I don't really remember the reference, but most of it is in there. So if you just look up the paper, it's in there. But what you want to do is just constrain the circumferential inflation. So what you're just getting are projections. That's how I think about it. But the details are quite complicated, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Second question is for the soft fish. What material for the packaging and how long it can stay in the water without leakage? I saw some lines on the surface. What's that for? I think it's the soft fish. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the iodine in the zinc iodide chemistry leaks into the silicone. The silicone is quite porous, and so over hundreds of hours, you start to get iodine into the silicone, and we think it makes it a little bit stiffer. It doesn't seem to cause leaks or anything, but we believe there is mechanical performance changes over time with that system. So packaging of it will be important. I think it's a great point. We need to passivate the silicone surfaces somehow while maintaining stretchability. This is something like in the battery in your cell phone. It's had decades of research put into the packaging. So it's maybe a less fun thing to do, but probably the most important thing to do. And those lines are strain relief. So it allows I think you're talking about the relief patterns on the tail fin, and it allows more bending for the same pressure.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So that's the question. That's a wonderful talk. Compared with the traditional rigid robots, we know that soft robot is a very new subfield. Most of the soft robots are still made in labs. I was wondering, what did you think we can do to promote the applications of soft material and make them more welcomed in the market? Yeah.
Well, I think this is the most important thing our field can be doing. And I think that I would love to have a catalog that you open up, and I want this fluidic actuator, and it's right next to a DC motor. That roboticists don't view soft robots as a separate thing. They just view it as part of robotics, and hybrid systems of soft and hard robots. But what we need are more reliable demonstrations, simpler to use demonstrations that roboticists who aren't necessarily soft roboticists can use. And I think that requires commercialization and taking existing demonstrations and trying to scale them up out of lab to make them purchasable and affordable by our own colleagues.
Okay, actually that's really good. I think a lot of people was wanting to know for this soft robots can get in the market, because there are many people looking for this. Yeah,
there's examples. There's Soft Robotics Incorporated. They have been showing some commercial success. There's Stretch Sense from Auckland, New Zealand. They're doing well on the sensing side. I have a company making stretchable sensors, and I think Artemis makes Artemis out of Colorado makes some stretchable electro-hydraulic actuators. So there are people trying, and there's some sticking there. So it's working to some extent.
Okay, very good. Yeah. So next question. Yeah, thank you so much for the informative and inspiring talk. I believe that not only design new structures, but also selecting and integrating proper function material is quite important. How did you manage your collaborative work with material scientists at Cornell or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that there's it's very important to have an expectation match when you start these collaborations. If you work with a roboticist who's used to ordering parts online and putting it into a robot, and then you give them actuators that you make in your lab, they're going to be pretty disappointed because they're going to fail and they're going to lose confidence in what you're doing. So finding collaborators that are okay with iterations, lots of iterations, I think is important, and I have that at Cornell as well as everywhere else. All those collaborator list I have are the collaborations that have survived. They're not the only one. there are many that haven't, but not in bad faith. Just that the expectation levels are different. So you just have to try and keep trying. But I think it is necessary. I don't think you can do all this alone. We really need to collaborate to make this stuff work.
Yeah, I see the last part of your talk. There are really a lot with new materials, right? All these kind of fabrication issues and control the properties was involved. Yeah, that's very, very important for everyone. I think this open a new kind of channel or window to get more people can, go together. I totally agree with you. Only the calibrator can be survive. Yeah. Okay, last question. Yeah, dear Dr. Sheffield, there are several actuation mechanisms like magnetic, optical, shape memory materials, electricals, all this and shit. Could you please compare them and which is most suitable for software robots?
That's the $1,000,000 question, or the expensive question. That's the answer is that there's no general actuator that you should use for everything. In nature, we use muscle for everything just because that's what we evolved, and it's generally good, but it's not ideal for everything. Internal combustion engine with pistons is a much higher power density and efficiency than we have, but it's not adaptable. It doesn't move and things like that. So I think the most convenient way to actuate is electrostatically. We, as a society, as a global society, we've developed these power systems that are based off of current or electrostatics. And so if you can directly use those, that's the most convenient way. The fluidic actuators we use are the simplest way to get to real work, things that can move human scale objects. Electrostatic actuators are very fast. You can get high frequency actuation, and that's good. Some of the work from Christoph Keplinger is pretty exciting in that it uses electrostatics to locally move liquids, and that might be a general approach. He's convinced it is, and I've seen some pretty convincing work that it could be, but it requires a lot more development. So at the moment, and magnetic is great for moving through depths, but requires high current, and so that's sometimes a problem, but very good in the medical field. So with MRIs, shape memory materials are good for very high force densities. You can make very thin strips of metal that can do a lot of work, but they're not very efficient. So you need to be able to apply high energy systems. So I think you can find pluses and minuses about optical. We actually work on liquid crystal elastomer actuators for remote actuation, high resolution actuation, but the efficiency is quite low. So all of these things have pluses or minuses. I think what you do is look at your application and then figure out what your resource limits are. If you don't care about efficiency, or if you care about form factor, you need to do hundreds of newtons of work, or you don't. These things are what you need to do, and then there's probably a soft actuator that can help you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's also question part. I think we want to, say thank you to you. That's a normal kind of certification from ICANX. Yeah, we're proud of you to deliver your latest work here. And I think the whole field, not only the field, in your field, or many other people in different will benefit from the talk. So, Robert, that's for you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I appreciate you.
Now we already have 300,000 people online listen to your talk. So I will put the number on the certification later and send to you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, it's very nice. So this came to our dialogue part. Yeah, because today we have several professors here. Yeah, Professor Philip Kim from Harvard University. Say hello. Yeah, Mr. Kim from Korea, our lovely beauty. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think we can start to, asking some questions for this. Just now, Robert really delivered one top for the structures. Yeah. Now, also related a lot with materials, which Professor Kim will go to talk. And both Professor Kim was very interested into these new materials. I think maybe we can start this. So, Miso, I think you have a lot of kind of things to say for the materials I have used about that. Okay.
Oops.
Yeah.
So you.
Now I'm on, right?
Yeah, cool, please.
Okay. Before this event, I just mentioned to Robert a little bit about the mechanical metamaterials, and I was wondering, I think the architected materials is one kind of metamaterials in a broad meaning. So would there be any plan from your side to apply those mechanical metamaterial experts into your work, into integration your work or something like that? So I'm working on metamaterials. So I'm so wondering how I can apply these mechanical metamaterials in the actuators and furthermore like extended to the robotics. So yeah, that's kind of again the same question that I gave you before the event.
Do you remember the octopus that I had that was on land that I showed you?
Yeah, I actually took the picture, so I loved it.
So I think that being able to not have to do the liquid metal infusion that we had done, because it's kind of tedious. If you could print directly these, or otherwise make these mechanical metamaterials that you can switch the stiffness on and off, that would be very useful for us. And I think it would be maybe compatible with the ways we've made our printed our lattice structures and had these tendon routings. I think it would be maybe very compatible with mechanical metamaterials, but it's not something we're doing because we know there are much better experts like yourself working on it. So we would just love to be a customer for that.
Oh yeah, I'm still learning, unfortunately. So yeah, the challenge is that we can design the structures, but it's really hard to integrate the functional materials into those structures. So I'm amazed how you integrate those ionic, some soft materials into some fancy structures you designed. So I hope to get there at some point.
Yeah, I didn't design it. My students did, so I'm just lucky.
Okay. Yeah. So, Philip, you are experts on the materials. Yeah. You make a lot of new materials from fundamental. I think your material also applied in many, fields. Maybe some in the robots. Did you have any comments here?
I think this nanoscale materials, low dimensional materials might be useful for some of this robotics. I think the electromechanical system, electromechanical actuations and those kind of parts. But scale is relatively small at this point. So I think there is a bit of the scale mismatch. I think that might be MEM side or NEM side. I think that's kind of good starting point that the low dimensional nanoscale material can meet with the robotics. I think that's my guess, but I don't know how much actually efforts is being happens back to the little bit small size of the system. I know that your colleague, Paul Mackin, for example, is very active now in the robotics and the small scale. So I think there might be good kind of connections between them. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on one of his students' committees, and I'm just amazed at what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah. So it's very interesting.
I have one question in the same line. So, how much actually efforts is being made at combining this soft robotics with hard robotics? In some sense, I think these are kind of interesting field. Might be in the real animals or real humans, and there are always components that between the soft versus hard components. You briefly allude that, but I don't know whether any kind of significant efforts to make the hybrid systems of this kind of two robotics together?
Well, I think one of the people doing the best work on this is actually my former student Hui-Chen Zhao. She's doing quite a bit of that, and so and I think it requires people with a strong knowledge of mechanics and kinematics to get the best synergy between the dissipative viscoelastic kind of stuff and the stiff structures. And I think that's not really what we do, but I see it's happening a lot, and that I think is what we need for people to embrace soft robotics as a tool, not just a research discipline.
Okay, it is interesting. Actually, materials are fundamental. Yeah, so for all the system, I say without materials, nothing will happen. We also might buy different materials. So, yeah, Professor Philip, you are done a lot of work for the new materials. Yeah, can you give some words for this kind of new material direction? Yeah, so what is going to happen next to contribute to the society? Yeah.
I wish I know that what is the kind of future should look like. I think the new material comes with kind of few different frontier in some sense. Some of the things is just try to find a completely new materials that doesn't exist in the world before, and discover the new type of the materials and new functionality of the material. I think that could be certainly very active directions to pursue. But at the same time, it could be old materials, but different shape and different combinations. Say, it's same old materials, but just make it simply small and provide some structures. I think that is kind of tied with this metamaterial idea that Miso brought in, right? And then suddenly you discover the new functionality. Or sometimes you combine the one material with the other one, that both of the materials are known materials, but at the interface of those materials that new things comes around. So I think the explorations of this new materials comes with kind of few different routes. One, just to try to find the completely new materials, but the other one is a known material, but different way of the forming or structuring.
Okay, very good. Yeah, adding one catch in here is because a lot of people now is talking about the, IC, the silicon. Yeah, so what's your opinion for next, the IC? What kind of new materials can replace silicon? Is that possible? Is it not possible?
I think, again, that's a very hard question. I'm not sure that I can, I have authority to answer that. I can share the anecdote that when I started my graduate school, I think many years ago, and many people just kind of warned me that, the semiconductor, including silicon, the era is gone. I think, but we've been witnessed that that's not true at all. In fact, although this is known material for a long time, because we have invested a lot of the time and technologies, the level that we can manipulate this material, especially silicons or semiconductor, is such a kind of advanced technologies. Of course, there is some limits now coming in, but whether we can replace this material with a completely different one, I think I have already been doubt. Might be the new materials will help the silicon, help this semiconductor to provide a different type of the functionalities. But completely replacing silicon is probably not an easy task.
Okay, great to hear that. I'm from microelectronic department. I'm glad to hear that silicon is dominant.
Silicon forever.
That's a silicon age. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to ask you another question, and this dialogue part, because that's very popular for the audience and very helpful for the audience, because many of our audience are graduate school students, are young scientists. Yeah, most of all want to know, how you pick up the students, because both of you, or three of you, are in a top university, and really picky, right, for the students, and also how you training them. Yeah. So please, who goes the first? Yeah, maybe Robert, you go the first.
Yeah. So I really care about passion in a student, and so I'll ask. At first, I've been, I think, very lucky. Every student I've had has been amazing, and I've only recently started thinking that one of the things that makes them amazing is they're passionate about learning, and so I don't really have to push them. But I think if I had to push somebody to learn in a PhD, it would be very frustrating. So I want to make sure that doesn't have to happen. So I like to ask, what is name? Just describe something that you've been passionate about in the past, and if it seems real, then that's pretty good. And of course, I'm sure that they've learned a lot in their undergraduate studies. So yeah, that's what it is. And like in terms of mentoring, I think a persistent and consistent approach to reinforcing ethics and credit, and knowing that we're successful because of the past, and so knowing the past and acknowledging it, building from it, recognizing your space in it, trying not to be too hyperbolic or exaggerating in your reporting of things, but still being accurate as to what you did and why you think it's important, and just doing those lessons over and over and over again is what was important to me when I was learning, and I try to do it. But hopefully I'm being successful. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah. So Philip, your turn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rob already mentioned everything I wish to mention. So I don't know what to add, but indeed, I would say that choosing students, I think we're choosing students in the both way, choosing for the student side, choosing the groups to kind of work with. I think this is a kind of mutual interactions, and I haven't actually still figured out what is the best way. I think, like Rob said, I've been lucky that all of the students I've been working with is kind of one way or the other. They are the best in their own situation. So I feel like I've been lucky. But certainly that what is important part is that how passionate they are, and how much actually motivation they have, because that usually PhD takes kind of many years, 5, 6, 7 years, and those kind of time frame. There's up and down during this the time. Without this motivation and passion, I think it's a bit difficult kind of go through when this challenge is coming in. I think that's kind of quite important part. Training side, I think the part that on the top of what Rob said, I think in the end of the day, the PhD time is important time that one can make the transitions from, say, students, but the end of the line that you becomes a really scientist or engineers, independent.
It's a transformer.
Right. So I think that transforms and how you become individual thinkers and scientists. I think that's kind of quite important part. And so one of the really important things that you get to there is once you just kind of done that, how to find out the right problems, how to assemble the right resource to solve the problem. And those kind of skill is kind of quite important skill. I'm emphasizing that, all right, so to get the PhD, I think this is something that you have to demonstrate. Right? So that's one additional thing I want to add up.
Okay. So, Miso, you may have a lot of things to share, because you grow up to be an excellent student, now is an excellent research scientist. Yeah.
The thing is, I'm not in university right now, so I'm in a national lab, as you know. So the thing is, the situation is a bit different from the other two professors. So we don't have that many students here. And the important thing here is that I belong to a group, a research group, consisting of so many colleagues. So when we propose one idea, we have to decide whether we want to work together or not, or for the certain topic. So at the time, the most important thing is that we have to share the same vision for the same research topic. For example, I keep mentioning this metamaterials. So a few years ago, we came up with this metamaterials topics. We've never done it. And I've worked on the energy harvesting only. And then the other people have expertise in ultrasonics and acoustics. And then we had some like a concept, we got to reach a consensus that we wanted to work on some new topic. And then we shared our vision, how we want to build up this research team into a really big metamaterials experts team. And that's what we are doing right now. And that's how we kind of got to be successful about collaboration and all those things. So students are not here that much, so we have to, but we have to hire postdocs. So the same situation. So we are sharing our vision, and then if she or he can share the vision, the same vision with us, then we would like to hire them here. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah, you point out about very important, part for the collaboration. I think in the training part for the students, the collaboration is very important. Yeah, be teamwork, be working with a team. Especially, in the young generation, I met a lot of, students. They always think, I'm the first. I came the first. I'm the best. Yeah. If you want them to do some kind of teamwork, it's really hard. If you have someone to be team leader, you have to support. Yeah. Sometimes got to the problems. So I don't know whether Professor Philip, you are in Harvard University. All the students think they are the best one. Maybe. So how to make them collaborate together?
I'm not sure about it, but anyway, I think when people comes in, then there are various different type of the opinions of themselves and others. But soon that everybody realizes, the world is really big, and there's always, I think, at least from my experience, I always find that 10 times smarter people than me that everywhere, right, including my colleagues in my institute. So I think that the feeling that, oh, I'm the best type of things were probably great subdued at probably first week of the starting graduate school. At least that was my experience. And I shared a very similar opinion from many ones. I thought kind of one of my colleagues is one of the smartest men that in the universe. But when I just talked with them, they feel like, oh no, I think there are more smart people around. And I think I'm not sure that this feeling that, oh, I'm the best will probably not last too long in the field of the research, because the world is so large and there are many, many different people and kind of working on many different subjects. No one can be the best in everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need training students. I think Robert have maybe same feelings because you travel from several universities. Yeah, all the great people surrounding you. How to collaborate with them?
Can I just mention something about previously? I think this conversation is a bit about students finding positions and how to manage grad school once they're in there. And in the current situation we're in, it's harder because going to conferences is difficult. I really appreciate what you're doing here. I think it's the future, and I love being a part of this. For the conferences that have existed and are trying to figure it out, like one of them is the Materials Research Society. I work in the staging group for responsive and adaptive materials, and I think that hopefully the audience here is relevant for that, and I would love to interact with them there too. And we're trying to make it so you can still have these interactions that you would normally have at a conference. And because I'm not sure how else to learn people's passions if it's not those kinds of interactions. So I think the future is going to be difficult. What you're doing is probably how to do it.
It's a way doing. We are team. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are teamwork. Only myself on the stage, nothing will happen. That's yeah. All of us from different world, you know, different part of the world made it. Yeah. So this was a big demo for the collaboration, right? For the teamwork. Yeah. Okay. We need to continue for the teamwork. Yeah. So yeah, I think okay, Robert. Yeah. So give you the chance. Let your lovely kiss show his face. Is he surrounding you? Okay.
My kids? No, they're actually no.
Okay.
They're gone somewhere else. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Great. So yeah, we move on. Yeah, we are right on time. I think yeah, Mason, now is your time.